So we're going to be getting a little controversial in today's video because we're going to be talking about how to use thought transmission to change your SP. And I actually want to start off this video just by pointing out that this is one of the many ways you can practice changing or selecting a different version of your SP. It's actually one of the ways that I like to practice because of, I'm going to get to in today's video, but I very much resonate with the belief structures that go along with thought transmission. But I just want to be very clear that this is not the only way you can go about selecting different versions of your SP. But with all that being said, let's first get into what is thought transmission in the first place. Thought transmission is essentially the concept that your thoughts, your beliefs, your feelings, and your assumptions about someone are received by them, either consciously or unconsciously. And the way that this makes sense to me is this understanding that we are all connected. In fact, that belief that we are all connected is actually what I would call the foundational belief in understanding this idea of thought transmission. And to make this practice more powerful, if you have a very deep relationship with your SP, or if you feel very connected to them, you can use that as rationale for why this can work for you. You can use this to remind yourself that you and your SP are already entangled pretty significantly. And when it comes to the actual practice of thought transmission, there's actually a number of ways that you can start practicing this. But something that you're going to notice with all the different ways that you can start practicing thought transmission is that they're all doing basically the same exact thing. What it's allowing you to do is it's allowing you to actually change the story of your SP. Now, before I go any further on how you can start practicing thought transmission, I do want to make it very clear that this is not manipulation. You're not trying to control or manipulate your SP. What you're doing is you're using this rationale of thought transmission to change yourself, to align yourself to the reality where this new version of them already exists on another timeline. So with all that being said, how can we actually start practicing thought transmission, and more specifically to pick versions of our SP that we want to experience? The first thing that you can start to do is you can start to change your assumptions about them, and more specifically the assumptions of what you think they are thinking in this present moment. So the way that you can start to go about this is first, actually as a pre-step, I would highly recommend finding security in the belief structure that we are all connected. And not only that, but you are God of your reality. You're the only consciousness in your reality, meaning that you dictate how people show up to you. Find security in that foundational truth before you even begin to start to try and change the story of them or change the story of what you think that they're thinking, essentially. Once you find security in that knowing, that's when you can start changing the story of them. And then once you find security in that knowing or in those belief structures, you can start changing the story of them. And the way that you change the story of them is going to be very dependent on the circumstance that you're dealing with and also the version of them that you want to experience. But, let's look at some examples here. Let's say that you and your SP are in no contact right now, and you want to select the reality where you and your SP are actually together and in a loving relationship. What you can start doing in your current present moment is you can start thinking for them. So what you can start doing is you can start seeing your SP in your imagination, and you can start telling yourself the new story of what you think that they're thinking in this present moment. So for example, you can start telling your story that he's probably missing me, but can't admit it. That's probably what he's thinking right now. When you start changing the story of what you think that they're thinking, what this allows you to do is align more with the reality where you and your SP are in your relationship, where you're not in no contact anymore. Another way that you can start practicing thought transmission is through inner conversations, where you can speak to your SP in a very lovingly way. You can have actual conversations with your SP working out the fight. And in those conversations, you could see yourself as apologizing to each other or, making amends. Now, the idea when it comes to thought transmission, though, is to have this foundational understanding that what you're doing is you're connecting to them in this moment where you're actually having the inner conversation or where you're actually thinking for them. It's a little bit more grounded in that truth rather than you just trying to do these imaginal acts in order to get what you want in your physical reality. So that's why I recommend that you start getting very secure in the foundational understanding of, we're all connected and thought transmission, like what it actually is. Because when you start from that understanding, when you start from this understanding that we are all connected, and that, thought transmission is we can influence the way other people think just by thinking for them, and understanding that we're God of our reality, we're the only consciousness in our reality, meaning that we dictate how people show up to us in our physical reality. When you start reminding yourself of those foundational truths, that's what you can use to build off of when it comes to these imaginal acts or these inner conversations or changing your new assumptions of what they're thinking And like I said, depending on, your current circumstance and the reality that you want to actually experience with your SP, it's going to dictate what new story you're telling about your SP or the kind of thoughts that you're thinking for them. And actually, to illustrate this point further, I'm going to share a personal story of how I practice thought transmission with an SP of mine. And for the record, I'm not going to get into too many details when it comes to my SP stories because my relationships are private to me and I don't like to put other people's business out on the internet. But in this particular case, essentially what was happening was I was dating this guy, and this guy was like very nice. He was a good guy, respectful, kind, all of the good qualities, right? But one thing that I wanted to experience from him was I wanted to experience more of his masculine side, because what I noticed in this relationship was I noticed that I was taking on the more masculine role. I was the one leading, I was the one deciding, and I kind of felt like he was putting that responsibility on me in a sense, and I didn't really prefer that. So what I did was I actually started practicing this art of thought transmission to start picking the more masculine version of him. Now, keep in mind, I'm very secure in this knowing that we're all connected. Like, I truly believe, in my core, that all of us are the same and that we're all connected. We're just having different linear experiences. But I was very secure in that knowing, and I was also very secure in just knowing that I'm the only consciousness in my reality, and that means I'm the only one with free will in my reality. So I had very strong foundational understandings of these teachings, and so this art of practicing thought transmission came very natural for me. And so the way that I went about this was I actually wrote down all of the things that I wanted him to do and say that were more like masculine in quality. So for example, one of the things that I wanted him to do was I wanted him to hold the door open for me when we were getting out of the car. And for the record, when I first started dating him, he actually did do that. But I noticed, as weeks went by, he stopped doing that, and it got to the point where it wasn't because I was trying to beat him to it, but it got to the point where he never went around to the other side of the door to let me out, so I just opened the door myself, right? And so one of the things I actually wrote down, it was very specific, but I remember I wrote down, I was like, I want him to actually yell at me when I go to open the door, and then he goes around and opens the door for me. And by yell, I don't mean being aggressive or abusive or mean. It was more of hey, don't touch that door. And then he would go and get the door. I kid you not, the next day he actually did that. It was kind of mind-blowing for me. But getting back to thought transmission and how I practiced this art of thought transmission with something like that was, as I was writing that down, what I wanted him to do, I was actually simultaneously thinking in my head of what he was probably thinking in that moment. So what this looked like in my imagination was, in this moment where I was writing this down, I saw him in his house, and I saw him sitting on his couch just kind of thinking about things, and more specifically thinking about me, and how he was really craving showing more of his masculine side in these ways. And so as I'm writing down all these things that I wanted him to do and say, I was simultaneously thinking for him. I was seeing him on his couch thinking these thoughts, essentially, about how he was craving the same thing. He wanted to express more of his masculine side with me. And again, I was doing this from the perspective of thought transmission. I was very much aware of the fact that I was thinking for him. And because of my high levels of security within these foundational truths that we are all connected, and that thought transmission is real, and I'm the only consciousness in my reality, and I dictate how people show up to me, because I had such a high level of security in those knowings, what this allowed me to do was fully believe that what I was thinking for him was actually what he was thinking in that present moment. I literally convinced myself that that's what he wanted. And I kid you not, like I said, the next day, he literally did exactly that. I remember I went for the door handle and he was like, hey, don't touch that door handle. And he ran around and got the door for me. Mind you, this had not happened for weeks. It seemed almost out of nowhere. He did it the first few times we started dating, like I said, but it stopped shortly after that time. And so I remember just kind of as he was going around the car, I remember just sitting there what the heck? That wasn't the only thing. I'm not, like I said, I don't want to get into too many details with my relationships, but I wrote down very specific things that I wanted him to say, only to have him, the next time we interacted, say those things word for word. But the reason why I think I was so successful with this kind of manifestation was because I very much believed that what I was thinking for him was actually what he was thinking in those moments where I was writing down what I wanted him to do or what I wanted him to say. I saw him as wanting to do the same exact thing. And so that's actually another tip to keep in the back of your mind as well. I have found it very effective to not only think for your SP and what you want them to do, but also think of it from their perspective as well. See them as wanting to do the same thing. That can help lower the resistance you may have to their old version of self. And keep in mind, you're not manipulating them in the 3D reality either. Like in this example where he like yelled at me when I was going for the door, I actually didn't even think that this was going to happen as quickly as it did. So I kind of just kept, and I didn't want to change my behavior around him. Like I was very focused on just kind of like being me and like living my life. And so I naturally, when we parked, I naturally just kind of like went for the door and he just happened to yell. Like I wasn't trying to like, hesitate over the door handle and like wait for him to like see that I wanted him to, not go for the door handle. I just kind of went for it. But my whole point here is that you're not manipulating them in your physical reality. You are literally only convincing yourself. All right. This was probably one of my favorite manifestations. First of all, because of how easy it was for me to do it. And I credit it to my deep understanding and knowings of those foundational truths of like, we're all connected. And I truly do believe in thought transmission, and very kind of like crazy out there pieces of, advice or belief structures. But it was also one of the reasons why I really liked this manifestation was because it was like the first time in my life that I actually kind of felt like a puppeteer. Like, and that sounds like, it's probably not the best way to put it, but when I say like I would write it down and then he would do it, that's what happened for like everything that I would write down. And so it was like, it was very eye-opening for me where I was like, whoa, like we really are in control of how people show up in our physical reality. But as I mentioned in my, actually my last video of how to select different versions of your SP, I mentioned in that video how practicing these manifestation techniques on romantic interests, I found that to be a lot easier for me than, let's say, like family members. So keep that in the back of your mind. Like if this doesn't come natural to you with a particular relationship, it's not because you're failing, it's not because you're bad at this art, it's just because you're holding the old story over them. Like you're having trouble letting go of the old version of them because of how well you know them. So keep that in the back of your mind. Part of this equation for actually practicing thought transmission requires you to detach from the old story. The best way I have found to go about this is just understanding what parallel realities are and understanding that in every single present moment you're actually experiencing a completely different version of your SP, even if they seem like they're the same. But for me, just by understanding what parallel realities are and how different states of consciousness actually select different versions of others, and how we're all completely different versions of self in every single present moment, that understanding has helped me detach from the old story, because the old story is completely irrelevant. If it's a completely new person in front of me, what that means is that their past is completely irrelevant if they're a completely new person, right? So just keep that in mind, that your detachment from their old story is also very important when it comes to practicing this art of thought transmission as well. But with all that being said, I hope this video helps someone out there. As always, only use the information that resonates with you and completely leave the rest. If this resonates with you, then by all means start using it in your manifestation practice when it comes to SP manifestations, whether it's romantic or family members, whatever. If this information does not resonate with you, you don't need to use it, so just keep that in the back of your mind as well. But like I said, thought transmission is actually one of my favorite tools to use. I found it to be one of the more empowering practices that I've started when it comes to SP manifestations, especially when it's done properly, not from the perspective of trying to like control or manipulate them in the 3D reality. So definitely try it out if you feel called to. But with all that being said, I'm gonna end the video here. Definitely let me know what you think about it in the comments below. As always, I love hearing everyone's different perspectives, but that's all for now. Until next time, keep creating, everyone, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.